Welcome along to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about the different options we've got available for global talent. Now we've got offshoring, we've got outsourcing, we've got nearshoring, we've got partnering. There's a plethora of options that are available today. We know that from the industry data is that 68% of MSPs and TSPs can't find the right skills they need in order to be able to grow their businesses. And that's where Digital Team comes in. We help organisations solve that challenge of being able to find the right skills at the right price. For those that don't know me, my name's Peter Ward and I'm the founder of Digital Team. I'm lucky enough to be joined with James Davis today, and James is the Chief Strategy Officer for TSP Mentors. James really needs no introduction to the industry. He's been a seasoned coach and consultant and advisor for technology service partners in APAC for many, many years. And in the work that James does, he really specialises in helping organisations elevate their performance, but also then start to transform about being able to then deliver modern solutions for organisations and truly help business owners unlock their potential. And one of those key things for unlocking potential is finding the right talent strategy. And that's what we're going to be covering off today. So over to you, James.
Oh, mate, thank you for having me. That's probably the best intro I've ever had, so I appreciate that. Well, today, like you said, we're going to talk about the global talent solutions, and I don't think I realised that so many partners have that challenge. That figure of 68%, that's quite significant, and a lot of people are only sort of coming up towards trying to find solutions, and a lot of the reasons for that is a lot of trends that have been sort of signalling for the last few years that are really coming to a head. And these sort of 6 that I'm showing on the screen, we're getting increased client churn, the increased cyber requirements on us and our clients, the changing needs of our clients, mergers and acquisitions that are happening in the space, in the partner world, the vendor world, are really starting to affect us in different ways. Our offerings are being commoditized, and the big one, inflationary pressure of wages going up. They're all coming together to make this difficult for us as small businesses, especially around how we're going to attract, retain talent. And like you highlighted, it's very hard to get people locally. And a lot of that has come from our past where, say 10 years ago, we weren't training a lot of our younger people. A lot of them are lost to the industry. So we're needing more experienced people. And we just don't have enough in Australia and New Zealand, especially to be able to fill those gaps. And so more and more partners are starting to look towards global solutions for that. And one of the other key drivers before we really dive in is our profitability is really poor. Our industry average is operating at 6% EBITDA, and at any one time, 25% of the industry is running at break even or a loss. We're really struggling. So I'm finding that that commercial aspect is really what's driving it. And as we'll talk about very shortly, I think there's a bit of danger of focusing too much on profitability as a driver to go global. It's affecting our decision making in the wrong way. And so let's start diving into it, because this sort of area is very well trodden in our industry. There's been some waves of how we've offshored or outsourced in the past. We're probably maybe on wave 3, I'd say, for the general MSP, TSP, SMB space. But we keep continuing to make the same mistakes over and over again. And that's what I wanted to cover before we go on to the positives and understanding the different options that we've got and how to make strategic decisions. We need to really know what we're doing wrong. And the first one is tying into that financial side. A lot of us are diving into the global talent solutions because we can save money. And while that's a potential benefit, a lot of partners keep making the same mistakes around going super cheap. Most of us, and I'd say nearly every one of us, don't want to exploit our workers, but we're going for as cheap a resource as possible. And that causes multiple mistakes from the start. It's whether we're ending up choosing the right BPO to work with, hiring the right talent in the first place, or misaligning our expectations. But what a lot of we're doing from going cheap is we start off by missing the people element in this. Especially if we're offshoring, we're hiring people to become in our team. If we're just seeing them as dollars on a page, immediately we're treating them as a commodity. And that's going to set us right back. It's completely the antithesis of how we've always run our small businesses, what we're about. But subconsciously, that's what we end up doing. And we start to see talent as disposable and not treating them as people from the very start, because we're just going that cheap side and saving money on a P&L. And what that will start doing is setting unrealistic expectations. One thing I've always struggled with is we'll go overseas, we'll get some talent, they'll be cheap, they'll be a lower level resource, yet we expect them to produce 4 times the amount of output as someone here, and we expect them to work at a much higher level than what we hired them for. And I see that time and time again, and I don't know what causes that mentality, but I suspect that's to do with the fact we're seeing it as numbers on a page and we're not seeing the people aspect. And on top of those unrealistic expectations, we go into this misunderstanding our obligations. And I'll talk a lot more about those options that you listed off before, Peter. But for some reason, we expect to be able to say offshore, we're bringing someone on as part of the team, but then we can treat that as a commodity. So if it's not working, we'll just sack them and we've got no responsibility. We don't understand the obligations of us acting as an employer with a BPO in the middle. We don't think about it in the same way. And for most of us, I think it's ignorance. There's a certain point where we just need to treat this as either a commercial arrangement with an outsourced provider and we manage it like a vendor, like anything else we would, or we've got an employee that we need to look after and treat them the same as we would treat someone as a local onshore. But I think that lack of clarity creates so many problems for us, whether it's the way that we manage leave, whether it's the way that we manage them through HR processes, performance management, incentives. All of that seems to go out the window. But especially when it comes to termination, whether we've got it wrong or whether we've hired the wrong person, we just expect to be able to turn off the tap. And that's where a lot of issues crop up a lot of the time. And so we need to be less ignorant and help get that understanding when we're engaging in this type of arrangement in the first place. And I know I've mentioned it a bit earlier, but hiring the wrong resources, that mentality of saving money, we go for the lower experience resources, the lower level roles, and then expecting them to work at a certain level. We often just don't hire the right people in the first place. If we're, say, needing a finance manager level person overseas, why are we hiring a finance admin to act in that role? It's not going to work from the start. It's no different to as when we do it here. If we're expecting them to be customer facing, and then some people in different regions have different levels of communication skills and the accents and things, why would we hire someone that doesn't communicate and was never going to be in a role that would be client facing? Why are we putting them in that position to fail in the first place because it was never going to work? It's these kinds of things where, again, we're not thinking about the people, we're not thinking about what role we're filling, what level of capability do we actually need to be able to then direct and make the right decision to put the right person in or the right commercial arrangement from outsourcing.
And so, James, do you think that this problem when you start to then look at offshoring or outsourcing or whatever that might be, really starts to highlight the challenges that people have with managing staff full stop?
Oh, 100%. It really shows the cracks very quickly. And it reflects in the way, too, Peter, that a lot of people are defaulting to getting everyone back in the office so that they've got control. We had all that rush to remote work during COVID, and we never matured in our practices. We never put in the methods to actually hold people accountable, have the right data and oversight in our businesses. And so the default is we need everyone back in the office to solve all these problems. And that's exactly the same as when it's offshored or outsourced. We don't have the maturity in the way that we manage our business to properly insert different solutions into our business operations. And I think this is where all of these issues are coming from. Is it's maturity on how we operate. It's not necessarily the other side. That's the problem. Is that something that you see often?
Yeah, look, it's actually one of the mistakes that we made very early on when we started Digital Team is almost this assumption that, people are good at managing staff. And the example that we have is very early on, a team member didn't work out when I asked the question simply to the organisation, when was the last time you spoke to that staff member? And they said, oh, about 3 weeks ago. We learnt so much through that process about, well, our job as a BPO is really to help support and rise the maturity of the organisation. So helping them bring in things like career development plans, professional development planning, bringing in, structured review cycles. And one of the things we've seen is a number of our customers love what we put in place and then ask the question, can we roll that out to the rest of our team in Australia or New Zealand or wherever they might be? And we go for it because we've got that belief is that, the best way to rise all the boats in the harbour is to simply lift the tide. So, we really lean into helping build that maturity because, let's face it, often we're not good at managing people no matter where they are. And that's where we've seen that we can add that value.
And this is a really good tie into what's up in the screen at the moment is partnering with the wrong BPOs. When we're driven by cost, especially, we've gone to, or we still go to a lot of snake oil salesmen. We promise the world it's super cheap. We can get you the talent and all be fine. But the mature BPOs will challenge you on whether you're ready. What practices do you have in place to manage your HR? They'll bring good methodology across, like you were talking about, and they'll line out your obligations. They won't hide behind just sign the contract, it'll be good. They will tell you exactly what you need to know, how you need to approach things, and what your obligations really are. And it is important to partner with the right BPO because there's a lot of issues that can be caused by the wrong BPO. And you slide on a bit further around what you were just talking about, that we haven't spoken to XYZ employee for weeks, months. What we tend to do, because we aren't good at people management, is we silo these guys that are offshore. The amount of partners that come in and they go, oh, we've got our team in Sri Lanka, or we've got a team in the Philippines. We don't really hear from them. We've never gone over and seen them. They're their own little team. They're not going to integrate into your business culture. They're not going to be feeling a part of the team. They will cycle out when they get a better offer somewhere else. There's no reason for them to stay apart from having a job in the short term. And that I see this one is a critical piece, but it's just because we don't think about how do we engage people in general. Because if you're not in the office in front of me, you're off my radar. And
Yeah, and I think that engagement is so important. So, whether you're a remote organisation in Australia and you've got somebody in Melbourne and somebody in Sydney, the same way that you would regularly connect with that individual with, daily huddles, bringing them together for various different cadences and events. The same with your offshore team is super important to be able to do that. And I think having the right BPO partner there helps enable that because they run local events to make sure that the team feels part of something bigger, whether that's a Mortal Kombat tournament, whether that's an end of financial year event, or even a Mother's Day event, bringing those people together. But they've also got a pulse on the team member as well, so that they can then, if that disengagement's happening, they can make sure that that's connected and raise that up and help foster and bring those two organisations together. Because what we've seen work really well is when the team members wearing the polo shirt, they're part of the all hands, they're part of the stand up, they just happen to be sitting in a different geolocation.
And the organisations that get that right have staff that are very dedicated to them, and you contribute a lot to the organisation. It's no different to if people are over here and getting that sort of engagement as well. And that engagement as well looks like training and onboarding. Again, going back to the BPOs, good BPOs will have an onboarding process, but they're not going to know all the ins and outs of what you need them to do in their particular role. So you need to actually break down that onboarding process. What systems do they need access to? What training do they need initially? And then what does training and development look like continually? It shocks me how few it's invested in the teams overseas around training and development on an ongoing basis. We treat it as, we'll hire you, dump you in the role, and then just good luck. But I've found from my experience, especially in a lot of those developing countries, they thrive even more on being provide training and development. They're hungry for it. They'll do it. Where we're all complaining that our employees in Australia aren't interested in doing that. And so we sort of, again, don't think about that people aspect. We don't see them as part of their team, and we just see it as a sort of a number on a page over here that aren't truly there. And that culture seeps in, and that's why a lot of this fails. And then you add on top of this the lack of processes and maturity that we have in our organisation. And going back to the very start, where we might be hiring lower level resources, how are they going to know what we want and expect if we haven't mapped out those processes? It's something that I see time and time again. We expect them to work at a very high level of maturity, and they should know all of this stuff. Yet we hire in like a level 1 to expect the level 3's output. And then finally, as we start to get through this segment, we choose the wrong model. I'm sure you see this all the time, Peter. People use outsourcing and offshoring interchangeably, and we'll go into this in more depth. But we assume we're doing something, but it's a completely different model, and so we're misaligning that from the incorrect language right from the start. Without the right BPOs, without the right sort of maturity, most will let that slide. But if you've got a mature BPO, they will correct you very quickly what they're doing and what to expect. But that ignorance again fuels our failure because we're not getting this sort of right. And at the end of it, what we're seeing is these sort of impacts. So we spend time on investing in outsourcing or offshoring, and we focus on that. And while getting it wrong, it stops us from focusing on business growth. We end up having poorer margins because we cause more issues than we solve. The risk goes up because maybe we don't have good cyber practices. And that's even more exposed when we start going into other countries. We create a lot more delivery inefficiencies because we don't have practices and processes, and all of a sudden people are in a different time zone that we're not managing. We've wasted a whole lot of time in all this effort in not being successful, and we can create client churn from the not utilizing these resources properly, putting them in a position to fail, or just the fact we're concentrating on the wrong things and not concentrating on our clients. Is this what you've seen in the past?
Yeah, look, 100%. And I think it really comes back to any decision that you make in business is really understanding what the impact of that is. And the same way that a bad hire in Australia or New Zealand can have a huge impact on your culture, a huge impact on your customers, the same thing with hiring offshore as well is, going through that process and not thinking about people as a commodity, but really thinking about that as an investment and an asset that you're bringing into your organization. And I think going with that lens really then helps change that game, because although it might be considered cheap in inverted commas, the impact of getting it wrong can be huge across the organization there across that. And it's the misstep of then having to go back and then revisit that process as well. So, really going in with eyes wide open to make sure that you're making the right decision in order to get the right outcomes.
That leads in nicely to let's break some of this out of going into things wide open. We touched on that people interchangeably say outsourcing and offshoring. They're very different things, and we want to break this down. A lot of people are unconsciously incompetent in this space. They don't know what they don't know, and we've touched on, if you don't engage with a good mature BPO, they don't help you understand a lot of these things. You need to find the right partners that are going to get you into that conscious incompetence zone. You need to go eyes wide open. What am I getting myself into? What are our gaps so that we can work with it? You don't need to have all of this sort of stuff perfect to launch into global talent solutions, but you need to know where you're at to make a decision whether to proceed. Maybe you are way too immature and you don't have a lot of things in process, with process and other things in place, that you are going to fail by doing it, where you might need to take a couple of months to get some stuff in place and then launch into it. Or you might have enough to get going and know that you'll have a continual improvement program that's going, but at least you go into it. And then once you get into it, you can drive that continual improvement, and it becomes a part of your business naturally. But to get started, let's break down into these different areas. I'm not going to go super depth, but let's break down the 4 common ways to get global talent. Outsourcing is what most people use as a term to mean anything that's offshored, but it doesn't actually mean that. Outsourcing is a clearly defined commercial arrangement of engaging another company for specific functions. There's specific deliverables. You're not getting necessarily a named resource. It's the same as how we operate as an MSP. We're outsourced IT. Where we could be next door and it's still outsourced. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's overseas. It's got some benefits around cost savings and mitigating risks and shifting risk, being able to get specialist skills that do this. It can create some flexibility, but a lot of the time, outsourcing, the company that you use for that will dictate how they operate. They'll have clearly defined methodology of what they deliver, how they deliver it. You don't get a whole lot of choice into manipulating that. And that's a very big difference to offshoring. Offshoring is moving resources and roles to a different country. It's offshored. Now, whether you do that directly and have your own entity in another country, whether you do direct contracting or you engage with a BPO, is irrelevant. That's the methodology to manage your risk, to deal with payroll, all of those kinds of things. But it's that ability to get employees for your business directly. We've got the advantage of reduced labour costs. We get access to global talent. We can use this to extend our work hours. There's multiple benefits, but there is a big difference between outsourcing and offshoring. And before I move on to the other ones, Peter, would you add any more context to those two? Because I know that's where a lot of people get stuck.
Yeah, and look, I heard an interesting sort of terminology recently talking to a customer, and that they described outsourcing as bundling some stuff up, throwing it across the fence, and not having any control in then the output that then comes back, because they're not using your processes, your tooling, your methodology. You're effectively handing off that function, whether that's answering the first line of calls and ticketing, whether that's finance, but that particular then outsourcer will do it their way, not necessarily your way.
I think that's a really important point. This is what you've got to think about in your business: is what outcomes are you trying to drive? What level of control do you actually need? And then what functions would you outsource or offshore? And it'll be different for every organization. There's no one single right answer on what to do. And as we talk about the other couple of segments, nearshoring is probably not a concept that comes up a lot in Australia and New Zealand. It's a lot more normal in North America and EMEA, because there's so many more countries. But basically, it's getting resources in a non-local location and getting resources in a different way. And that can be expanding into a new market. So you could be, we start to, instead of being Melbourne-based, we're recruiting people in Perth to fill that gap and extending our time zone, but still the same country. It might be we're getting people over in New Zealand, similar cultures, close enough time zone that it feels a lot more local. And this could be done again, whether it's through us directly, whether it's through a recruitment agency or a labour hire company. We're still getting resources, but we're just doing it in a more local based way, just not in the same exact geolocation. And there's benefits to that, but I don't see that very common in ANZ. It is with the larger companies that are expanding, as they're expanding out of their major city and going to another one. That's how they're doing nearshoring. But for most of us, that's not how we operate or make sense.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we're seeing from a nearshoring perspective is non-technical roles. So, for example, call centers in Fiji, or people that are doing debt collection in Fiji. But often the challenge with that nearshoring is that those skills aren't necessarily aligned with what you need for your own organization there. So, really be aware of that depth of talent and understanding when you are looking at that nearshoring market, what the depth of skills and experience in that particular geo is because not all countries' education systems are aligned to producing the modern contemporary skills and experience that technology partners need today.
It's a great call out. It's also not necessarily a way to save money either. If we're nearshoring from, even go from Australia to New Zealand, we're on the same salary bands. And like you said, whether or not the skills levels are right, it's also, do we have the volume to even justify having a full-time role for that sort of particular function, especially when we're not necessarily getting the financial benefits as well. So it can make sense. It's just how are we actually making those decisions. And the last one's partnering. I'm seeing this starting to get a lot more popular, especially on the technical side, where we'll have a company down here in Australia. They'll partner up with another MSP over in the UK, and they will have some sort of arrangement to do some resource sharing and some function sharing, so that they can do the round-the-clock support, or they're doing project work with different kind of resources, or even locally where I'm an MSP and I'm going to partner with another organization that's, say, specialists in Azure, so I don't need to hire them, and then I leverage their resources or their company to deliver services on my behalf. This can be quite a great way to that point we're just talking about. We might not necessarily have the volume for the level of skills that we need, or we need to expand in a way that we can control it and have great trust and be able to deliver the same sort of aligned outcomes for our clients and be culturally aligned. that we can mitigate those risks in some different ways. Are you seeing much from your side of more people doing this, or what do you see?
Yeah, look, we're seeing a lot, especially in the system integrator space, because I think in that system integration space, often organizations are very specialized in one area, whether that's around dynamics or whether that's around, data engineering. And obviously the technology stack is very wide and, often, in order to implement dynamics, there's a need to have, Entra ID, and there's a need to have some of the infrastructure pieces set up where, they will partner with other organizations rather than necessarily building that capability themselves. So especially in those system integrators that aren't trying to be everything to everyone, we're definitely seeing a lot of that partnering where they'll work with not only local partners that are specialized in that area, but often global partners as well, especially as the technology is getting very specialized around cybersecurity and some of those other components.
Yeah, I'm seeing that. I'm very much seeing that as well. And depending in the space in the market, it is either that local trusted SMB type engagement, or it is leveraging some more global partners, because we can make more margin by leveraging some of those guys over the seas that have that really deep speciality, a more cost-effective price than having someone here do it, and we're able to layer a value over the top that it enables us to get more margin. So again, there's so many different options that we just covered, and we mentioned 4 key areas, but there's so much difference in each one of how to go about it that there's no single right answer. You really need to understand your own business, what you're trying to achieve, and then knowing these different options, then being able to break that down and go the right direction for you. You need to be strategic. And this is where most partners are getting it wrong, is they're not strategic about it. They're making knee-jerk reactions on top of all those other mistakes that we're making. And this is why a lot of the time it's failing. But the organizations that get this right are really thriving and being successful. They are driving higher margins, they're driving better outcomes, and they're having a much larger organization than they probably would have been able to, which also impacts their local staff and helps them out too. But to achieve that, we've got to become a lot more deliberate, and we've got to be focused. If we don't know what we're doing and we don't know the right options and we're just chopping and changing, it is what affects us. And one of the big things I'd call out here is, I know that we're making knee-jerk reactions because I'm seeing a lot of partners that have got offshored staff in the Philippines. They're not getting the outcomes that they want. They write the whole country off. You can't get talent here. They're all hopeless. The BPO that we're working with is no good, and so we'll jump to another country, but not change anything. That I don't know. Are you seeing that level of knee-jerk reaction, or am I the only sort of one seeing it?
Yeah, look, I think there's definitely a frustration that's coming out, and I think some of that frustration that's been coming out is that the reality is that TSPs have moved, and often the skills that they've got and that the offshore team that they've built were designed for 10, 12 years ago, when the focus was very much around that service desk and help desk type resources. But the demands of customers have changed, and often organizations haven't adapted and grown their team or brought the right team members in. So, they get frustrated with the expectation. And as a result, a little bit sort of that knee jerk reaction of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right, rather than retrospectively and going, look, have I aligned my talent to what my customers are needing?
And then we haven't trained and developed them. It's it is a challenge. Or I'd add on to it as well as we dive in, because we're cost driven. A lot of us haven't kept up with inflation globally. We've struggled to keep up with it locally. But for a lot of nations that we're typically offshoring to, their CPI and stuff and inflation has been a lot higher than us. But we still have that expectation that we can still get the level of talent we did 10 years ago for the same price. And that again is that sort of ignorance and the lack of long-term thinking.
But I think that's local as well that we're seeing talking to customers. So those that potentially we find that L2 is often that middle ground is because the L2s have left to join another organisation and $20,000 or $25,000 more, and the organisations had to go back out to market and may not have gone out to market for several years, and there's almost this sticker shock when they go out into the Australian market and see what's happened in regards to the need to then increase their expectations to bring new talent into the business. And what that often does is then you start to bring new talent in at a higher cost. There's then a need to shift all the existing team members as well in order to create that parity. So I think there's often that expectation, well, I only pay $70,000 for an L2, that's all I need to go and pay today in order to get an L2. And the same with offshore resources as well, as what you're able to get somebody for 10 years ago is not the same price that you can expect to pay today.
And it's a challenge because we're not operating our business through financials. We're not looking at how are we managing our profitability and how are we growing our revenue and how are we keeping up with CPI. Most partners don't do price increases. So for a lot of us, we've got a lot of these legacy managed services deals that we sold 10 years ago. But that inflation has pushed them and eroded our margins quite significantly. And like what you pointed out as well, the client needs are dramatically shifting and their expectations of what we want, what they want from us are changing as well. And so for a lot of us, we're not looking at how do we increase what we make out of clients. We're looking at what can we do quietly behind the background to reduce our costs without having to change or do anything different. We're trying to avoid transformation as much as possible. But even on top of that, most of us never set up our financials and pricings right in the first place. So we're getting hit by a double-edged sword, basically. What you're seeing on the screen is like best practice, simple metrics for an MSP. If I'm generating $1 million in revenue, I should be trying to make 500K gross profit off that. And then at most, I'm spending 320K in operating expenses, which is our sales, general, and administrative costs, to end up with a good profit level. But this is way away from where the majority of the industry is operating. So it is reflecting that sort of knee-jerkness, the lack of transformation. What can I move my level 2 that I used to pay $70,000? Can I just move that and get to level 2s overseas for the same amount or less, usually trying to get less, and so that I can get back and claw back some profitability without changing anything? And that's where we're getting a big misalignment, especially when we start getting into our margin level and understanding our different services and all of that. Most of us aren't running profitable managed services in the first place. So any additional cost or change is going to even affect that more. And that goes back to our point around going into global talent solutions too early. It has a bigger cost and impact than what we're thinking about on the P&L. That burning of time, those false starts actually hurt us far more than what we expect. And so when we start to look at our levers in this, overall to manage our profitability, these are sort of the 6 key levers. And we, like what I was just saying, we jump straight to how do we manage our costs behind the scenes. But when we look at it, we've got many other levers that we can pull, and these fall into some of those mistakes that we were talking about at the start. We may just try and shift a seat across from Australia into Sri Lanka. We'll get a level 2 resource over there. That'll save us cost. But if we haven't built the processes in and we're not training that person in our way, what might seem like we're saving costs on paper, we're actually increasing our management load. We're decreasing our service delivery efficiency. All of a sudden, we thought we've pulled one lever. We've actually pushed one harder to make it worse. But we're not thinking about it in these sort of lever conversations. And before I move on, Peter, what do you sort of see? What stands out in this sort of conversation for you? Of like, what are partners that are getting this right? What are they doing well?
Yeah, look, I think maybe just before we sort of answer that, maybe just unpack that sort of lever conversation as well. And I think one of the things is thinking about in the power of one. And so if you can, as an MSP, increase revenue by 1% and you don't change any of your underlying costs, that will add 11% to net profit straight away. So simply a 1% increase will increase net profit by 11%. The ultimate lever is how do you increase revenue and decrease costs to then amplify that effect. So it's not just a one trick pony of reducing costs. It's how do you then do both of those to amplify that effect there. And what we're seeing of organizations that are doing it well are thinking about, well, as customer demands change, they're looking for modern work solutions, or maybe thinking about building out power platform practices and some of the more contemporary skills in M365. Thinking about how you can then leverage the offshore talent to then bring that skill and experience that you can then start to bring to your customers to add new service lines and new revenue opportunities to then amplify that lever even further.
I think that's an awesome point around leveraging the talent to create more revenue. And I think I'd point out with that is we need to hire those people, but we also need to provide support around them to build out the practices, because we're going to hire good technical people. Good technical people don't necessarily know how to structure how we should operate that, how we should position it and sell it. We still need that skill and capability when we bring in different kind of talent to actually make it leverage that and that amplification, like you just said. And this slides in nicely to, as we start to break this down and thinking about what sort of talent we bring in. On the screen at the moment, these are the 10 sort of key areas, core functions of a TSP operating model. A lot of people default to going, let's just offshore technical resources. But we've actually got roles and functions across our business that we can outsource or offshore or partner to pull those levers in different ways. Like you said, to bring in different talent that enables us to deliver new solutions that create new revenue streams. We can reduce some costs with better structure and moving some skills overseas, or outsource something so we don't focus on it, or be able to partner. But it goes across all areas of the business. Some simple roles: finance, admin, sales support, even scalable account management, marketing, you name it. Across the business wide, there's so many different opportunities there. But when we do look at, sorry,
James. Yeah. And I think marketing is a really interesting one, is because I think the go-to-market strategy for many MSPs is simply referrals. And it's harder and harder to be able to go and acquire more customers. And I often use the terminology when I talk to TSPs and MSPs is, what are you famous for? So what differentiates you in market? And that's where we've seen a number of organisations being very successful by building really deep talent in that marketing space to allow them to accelerate customer acquisition, but also allow them to stand out in what is really a very crowded marketplace.
It's a great point. Like this, and as you said that, I'm like, the other one that stands out to me is more of us are doing GRC type stuff, getting compliance officers in those sort of regions. There's a swathe of talent there that's probably not available here as well. Like there's just so many different things that we can use to enhance our organisation, that people need to break their thinking of just replacing what we've got. We need to actually utilise this as a way to transform, wherever it is, to transform the way that we're doing things already, or transform things by adding new capability that we didn't have. And that extends to the technical side as well. Like you covered that very well before around like people are needing broader skills and for their clients to deliver a broader set of technology, whether we partner, whether we outsource, or whether we offshore. Knowing that there's more than what we do today for an average MSP that's just doing desktop support and a bit of infrastructure management, maybe a little bit of cybersecurity, or maybe you're an SI, you're only in this space. There's so much there that we can leverage to create a lot more solutions and revenue generation capabilities, or just creating more stickiness with our existing clients. It's not just we're going to dump our level 2 and move it across. You need to think about this more broadly and more deeply. And when you break this down into our sort of operational, functional areas in our business, again, this just starts to help you go, how do I slot outsourcing or offshoring or partnering? Where does that actually sit? What functional area in my business is it? Who's accountable in my organization to actually drive it? How are we integrating these people into these teams? Whereas we see it as like a low level roles that just sit where they've always sort of sat, but not thought of it as how do they actually fit into the overall accountability and org structure, and how do we report what are the key metrics of success in this area. That level of maturity that we touched on, a lot of people aren't doing.
And I think most MSPs are trying to grow today. That they want to try and grow, they want to try and increase. But I think what's holding them back is they know that they need to build out that organisational structure, but the cost of doing that in Australia and New Zealand often becomes quite prohibitive. That person needs to be billable, 85% of the time. In other words, you look at the 20 billable days in a month, and, you need to have that person, at 16 and a half days or more in order to be able to then justify that cost. By thinking about offshore capability, it means that you can do a little bit of experimentation. You can do things a little bit differently, the way that you start to then build those practices and start to get that organizational structure right. Because, rather than having to bill it, maybe 16 and a half days in the month, you only need to bill 3 days a month, and then can also start to think about, well, what are my internal processes and tooling, and how do I improve my IP in order to be more efficient? So, ideally getting that structure right, but then thinking about, well, if I can do that at a lower cost, does that allow me to then accelerate my growth?
It's a great thought process, and we need to balance that, the financial aspects, the management capabilities that we do in our focus, and then leveraging that to really enhance our businesses. Like even if it is bringing in a lower level resource to enable one of the senior resources locally to lift up, take some of that burden away from them, so they can do better, either higher quality billable work, or being able to actually work on the business to improve efficiencies and lift the level of maturity. Again, you need to be very deliberate on why you're doing something, rather than just chucking some bodies at a problem. And that's where we need to stop making these mistakes over and over. We've gone through a lot of this detail of what to think about, what to consider, the different options. A lot of it comes back to how we operate our business. And so I'm going to break down a few different areas just for some thought process. One of the biggest things we do really poorly is implementing operational change. What we always go to is we go to number 4 on this. We go straight to implementation. We get an idea. We go, right, we're going to do some offshoring. We're going to go straight to that. We're just going to go straight to a BPO like Dijital team and go, hey, Peter, we need two level 2s. Can you fill that? And we'll just slot them in. Dijital team, mature BPO will try and help and shape that. But we've already dove into implementation. What we actually need to do is slow down to speed up. We need to understand what we're actually going to do. What are the best practices? and identify our gaps. So today's a lot of this at awareness level to help people understand where their gaps are, what they can do better. Before we do anything, we actually need to document stuff out, whether that's a strategy, whether that's processes, policy, a plan of execution. We need to slow down and get that right. Then we need to bring the rest of the team in on that. Once we've got clarity, we need to train it. Whether it's keying up our technical team to say we are bringing in some offshored resources. This is how it's going to work. This is how we're going to engage with them. This is what we expect from you guys. This is what we expect from the new roles. We need that buy-in and that knowledge from more than just you as an owner to make this successful. Then we implement the changes. We put things into to be able to oversee that. And then the most important phase that takes the most longest, and none of us ever do because we're too quick to move on, we need to manage that and inspect it. We need to review, have we done the right things? What have we missed to solve some problems in the short term? And then we need the right management practices ongoing. How are these people being slotted in? Are they being managed from a HR perspective? What data are we measuring to keep them accountable and measure success? If we do this, this is how we create sustainable long-term success. And this is where most partners skip over, and this is why we keep getting false start after false start after false start. The next thing I wanted to point out is this: knowing where you're at in maturity levels. We spoke about needing a lot of processes. If we're further left on this, on the stages, we're not going to have a lot in place. We're already making knee-jerk decisions. We're needing to micromanage and all those kinds of things. And we might not be ready for that because we're not mature enough in our own business practices. And as we go further down, we're obviously going to get more mature. But knowing where you sit helps you make those decisions around what gaps you've got, what you need to put in place to be successful. You might have a really mature finance department, but a really immature sales department and delivery department. Well, if you're looking at how do I create efficiencies and offshore or outsource, well, you start with the more mature department that knows what they're doing. Don't cause more chaos in the less mature areas. The next one to be aware of is our levels of leadership, that people management side. If we don't have good, strong leaders already locally, how do you expect them to then be able to manage people that aren't in the office, that are in different countries, different cultures, different time zones, different shifts, all of that kind of stuff? If they're not a strong leader in of themselves, that should be a warning flag that this is going to be an issue. And knowing these sort of mechanisms allow us to see where we're at, assess ourselves, and then make those sort of decisions. Before I keep going, Peter, is there anything that stood out from those sort of things for you?
Look, I think that key of just having a plan and sort of really understanding why it is that you're doing what you're doing is so important. But the other one is the measure of success. So how are you going to measure whether this initiative was successful or not is often what's overlooked as well. So I think, as you highlighted, having that plan, but also then how do you measure, whether that was a successful initiative or not?
And that, to be able to measure it, we need to break things down to know what we're trying to achieve. Yes, there's the plan, but when we start looking at, say, we're offshoring a role, what does that role actually do? What we might go to level 2. What does that actually mean? I can tell you, most organizations in our industry have a wild variation of what they think when they say a role. And so there's no established standards. There are, but most of us don't actually follow it. We will label something a level 2, but what we think is a level 2 isn't actually what generally in the industry might be seen. And so us actually breaking this down to see who's responsible for what, who's accountable, like who does this role actually report into? What does that mean? Who needs to be consulted on this initiative? Who needs to be informed? If we're offshoring, do we need to inform our clients that we're offshoring? Do we not? Like all of these kinds of things, we need to break that down. And then
Yeah, one of the things that Digital Team does with customers is actually build out that job description and the position description that goes along with that. So, typically when people think about those job descriptions, it's just a laundry list of technical skills. But there's so much more to that job description about, who's the stakeholders, what does the day-to-day look like, but also understanding the culture of the organization as well, because getting a team member, whether they're onshore or offshore, is not just about technical skills, it's also that cultural fit. So building out that holistic view of what a team member needs to look like, and then what the measures of how you expect performance about number of tickets processed per day, number of billable hours, and bringing those steps into allowing then TSPs to measure that engagement directly against that job description.
and as we go through, like even if we're not offshoring and we're outsourcing or partnering, we need to define this sort of stuff internally and externally so that we can manage to success. One of the things a lot of people don't think about when we're looking at this is work times. Are we getting someone in Sri Lanka to work Australian hours? Are we getting them to work split shifts? Those kinds of things, work weekends and all of that. Who's managing them? Are there the processes in place for them to succeed when there isn't a manager there at that time? All of these kinds of things start to come into play that we don't think about because we haven't needed to think about it in the past. And like you said, then breaking down into that specific role, being able to deliver a proper success profile that isn't just a laundry list of technical skills, soft skills, it's their roles and responsibilities, what they're measured on, what sort of training they're going to need. We need to be at that level of maturity to set them up for success. And very much to what your point around the cultural side, we need to assess that as we look to extend our talent globally. We need to be aware of what is our actual business culture, what are our core values, and then as we're assessing them, it's not just whether they've got technical skills. Are they going to fit into our team? Do they match our core values? Are we asking them to be higher level than what they really are? All of those kinds of questions we need to assess when we go through this process. And then we need to manage them properly. Again, going back to that, do we have the management capability to make this successful? And slotting them into our regular rhythms, like you mentioned, getting them in team huddles. Do we have a weekly team meeting? Are they part of our quarterly planning? All of that kind of stuff. It's not just someone randomly overseas that's not part of the team. If we're offshoring, we're getting them engaged. If they're outsourcing, how are we going to manage them from a partnership perspective? What are the reporting mechanisms? How frequently do we need to sit down with them to go through it? Same as a partnership. And the last sort of thing is I'll point out as we're starting to wrap up is how do we communicate with them? We've got people in different locations. Yes, we might have meetings, but thinking about are we just doing phone calls? We've got Teams. Are we doing with video? How do we connect with them? How do we have contact details for when there's no access to Teams? It's all of these kinds of things to bring them into the loop because they're not sitting in our office. But we need to keep up that communication. How do we break down that ad hoc stuff that we do internally when it's local to be able to project that out to a wider team? If you're not used to doing like all hands meetings in your organization to disseminate important business news, well, maybe you need to implement that. Maybe you need to implement an internal newsletter for all the changes that are going on in the organization. You need to think about how to keep people up to date. And so we've covered a lot. Get your final thoughts in a minute, Pete. But what I want you to do from this sort of webinar, this presentation, the discussions that we've been having, if you're thinking about global talent, set some goals, why you're doing it, identify the gaps, create that sort of plan, share it internally, tweak it, and then execute. Don't just rush into execution. If you're already on the motion, go back using this information, identify what you're getting wrong, make a list of stuff that you can improve, and build that into initiatives moving forward. If you're thinking about changing your strategy, again, take this information and reshape it using information rather than being unconsciously incompetent. We don't know what we don't know. So that's me. People are probably sick of hearing from me, Pete. What's your final thoughts? How would you wrap this up?
Yeah, look, I think, when I think about offshoring or outsourcing or any of the options that are available, I often think about it as a golden triangle. There's really three things that you're looking for and to try to achieve. One is around cost arbitrage, so being able to then unlock that value. The second is around the depth of skills and experience and understanding the education system and how that produces contemporary talent that meets your requirements not only now, but into the future. And the third part is thinking about the aptitude piece, or really about how that culture then leans in to what you're trying to achieve, and that alignment of what we call GSD, or get stuff done. And look, our belief is you can find two of those three anywhere in the world, but Sri Lanka is the only place that you can find all three of those. So, just thinking about as you're evaluating options, can you actually achieve those outcomes that you're looking for around cost, skills, and aptitude?
I love that. And the final thought I'd say is, if you're not investigating this and looking at global talent solutions, you're way behind the mark. A lot of the high performing competitors are doing this. It's not right for everyone. And I'm not necessarily saying you have to do this. But what you need to do is actually take the time to look at it and investigate it, and make the right decision for your business. But writing this off without actually knowing, you're really putting your business behind the eight ball, especially as the traditional services are commoditizing and your margins are shrinking. You've got no competitive advantage. So hopefully this has helped everyone, and thank you for having me, Peter. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, James, for all of the insight and really those nuggets about how organisations can use, global talent to unlock their potential. So thanks a lot again, James.
Thank you, mate.